Welcome back to Callahan's Corner, where you ask the questions, we answer them live right here on Facebook. Got special guest host here, Dylan from the Simple Growth team. Dylan was not only our first client, but actually one of our first team members who actually has gone out and mastered the skills of Service Autopilot and scaled a seven-figure lawn care and snow removal business up in Sudbury, Ontario. So I was trying to mix up a little bit so everybody is not just watching me provide the content, but with our team of almost 30 full-time people now. Going to be getting some of the Simple Growth team on here to kind of expose some of the bench and some of the skill set that we can provide. So had a question that was submitted here. I'm going to take a quick look at it and read it, but it was around a V3 estimate form here. So says, does anybody know if there's a possibility that I can connect Service Autopilot to my web page? Curious if when someone sends their information for a bid request, could it all get entered in so there's automatically a lead in the system? So great question by Matthew and Dylan. We're going to be jumping into this, but there is a bit of a confusion now that there's a V2 and a V3 website form or forms in themselves. So there's V2, V3. We're recommending as a company right now for probably your website lead capture using a V3, but for your on-site estimate forms and things that are interacting with your crews, as it lays right now, we're going to be using those as V2 because they're accessible in the legacy app. So Dylan, without any delay, really, do you want to hop in and kind of just break down the basics of a V3 website lead capture?
Yeah, for sure. And I guess the main point right off the bat is like, yes, you can have a form that will primarily go on your website and replace like a WordPress form or whatever you might have on there, so that those leads can come directly into Service Autopilot with no double entry. A lot of people are just accustomed to having that just go right to their email. They read their email, they type it into Service Autopilot. You definitely don't need to do that. So I'm in the marketing forms section here, and this is a V3 form. When you hit on the top right, there's a little add form button. It brings you to this screen here, but it'll actually prompt you to say, like, do you want to just start with a template of a form that we've kind of already created? Now, this one's not bad, and we can start with this template. It is a multi-page form, which I know some people don't necessarily love, but that's okay. We can tweak it from there. So if you hit next down here, then it'll prompt you to say, do you want to rename this form? I mean, we can just put demo beside it for now. And now it brings you to basically the form editor. One thing that I thought was kind of confusing when I first started using these types of forms was the pages are actually down here. So what you see here is not the entire form. When you first start out, you're in the design section. Once the form is actually designed the way you want it, then you kind of do some final configurations. We'll get to that in a second. And then the third and final step is you actually publish the form, and that gives you like the final code that you can kind of copy and paste and put on your website. So it seems like a lot of steps, but once you have it down pat, it's sometimes a couple minute process at most. Mike, I don't know about you, but I don't necessarily love the multi-step form, especially for like a website. So I'm actually going to click on here, and I'm going to delete the additional pages.
Yeah, I agree with you. They're doing for sure. The multi-step experience for most things we're doing is probably not ideal. The only place you may want to use that is maybe for a cold lead capture, semi-warm lead capture off like a Facebook ad or something like that, where you can go in and capture at least first name, last name, and email.
Yeah.
So that's getting registered in the system. But yeah, usually off your website, you're going to want it one quick form.
Yeah, and alternatively, if you're drowning with leads and you can't even keep up with the amount of leads that you have, well, a multi-step form might make sense where you're like weeding out the leads and saying, what's your budget? Do you have a $40,000 budget for this patio? If not, we're not a good fit. Stuff like that. But if you just want to capture the leads quickly, you don't necessarily want them to go through 3 or 4 pages if necessary. So I just renamed this field up here. When you click on a field, the editing is off to the left-hand side here. So if we wanted to, change any text here, we would just do that right here. Now these are the actual fields that are basically going to map to an actual field in the client screen. or lead screen. So once this form is all ready, when someone types in, Dylan in here for their first name, that's what's going to filter over and map over to the first name section when you're adding a client, so that you don't need to retype any of this. So this one's fine. First name, last name, contact email. That might be a little weird. We might just want that to say email. That's a little bit more common.
Yeah, and if they're using a V2 form, Dylan, this is a necessary step. So V3 kind of pre-maps a lot of this for you.
Yep, exactly. So I do really like that about V3. Now, this might look really weird on your website, the way that that these fields are very, very small. So I won't necessarily get into it right now, but you can increase the length or the width, I guess, of these fields if you'd like. For now, we'll just keep them as they are. But sometimes when you take this and put it on your website, it's going to look kind of like really, really skinny instead of filling out to the full width of whatever kind of box you copy and paste the code into. So obviously this isn't all the information that we need. We probably want to know what's their address, what services they're interested in, things like that. So you would just basically click on this last one here, and then we're going to add some additional fields. So we are probably going to want at least address, and what it asks you what type of address this is. I mean, presumably we want their service address, right? We want to know where we're actually going to be potentially performing the service. So it basically fills it all in here for you. If you want to double check and make sure that it's mapping to the right area, which it is already, then that's great. We probably also want to make this a required field. We don't want people just putting in their name and email, and then we got to say, hey, where do you live? So we can kind of make all of these required. And these ones already are required. They got the little asterisk beside it. And it says postal code. If you want to change that to zip code, you can. Postal code, that's what we call it in Canada anyway, so that's fine by me. And then the last thing is, or usually this is the last thing anyways, we'll usually want to do not multiple choice checklist. So I made a error here, very easy to kind of fix that just by clicking on it and then hitting delete. And then the checklist here is where we're going to prompt them to actually choose the services that they want to quote for. So normally what we'll do is we'll kind of replace this and say, services you are interested in. So something along those lines. Everybody kind of wants it named a little differently. And usually I'll kind of get rid of that secondary option just to keep it as clean as possible. And then if you scroll down here on the left, we'll probably want to make that required. Don't necessarily need to map it anywhere per se, but we definitely do want to change the generic options here. So I'll just do it kind of what my services were, but it might be lawn mowing, fertilizer, and weed control, bird cleanup, and maybe snow removal. And then you might want to include a fifth one, or however many services you have, include one extra one that just says other, because people will have kind of oddball requests that you just want to make sure they don't bounce off your website because you didn't have an other section. So, and then usually if you're going to have an other section, you probably want to have one final field here, and that would be like a paragraph field, or maybe it's a long text entry. Yeah, long text entry. So you probably just want to have like rename this to something like other, or comments, something like that, or service details. And that will allow them to, if they want to add any additional comments, they can do that there. If you want to change what this submit button says, you can just by clicking on the button. So you might want to say, get your free quote now, whatever you'd like it to be. And I think you can change the color and stuff like that. So if you want to kind of brand it up to what your branded colors are, that's great. Next thing is you'll actually want to go over to the configure section. I believe it automatically saves this as you're working, but probably a pretty good habit to get into. Just hit that save draft button down there. So, if you're doing conversion tracking on your website, you might want to redirect them to like a web page, like a thank you page or something. But for simplicity's sake, we'll just leave it like this. So when they submit this form, eventually this is going to be on your website. The lead or the prospect is going to see this message. So pretty common feature of a form on a website. Email notifications here. This is important. What do you want to happen when someone submits this form? You probably want to get an email saying, Bob Jones just submitted an estimate, especially if you're driving around. You're not going to be on Service Autopilot all the time. So you would actually add a notification here, and it could just be like a custom email. Recipient, I'll send this to Bill, and you could kind of just say it's coming from, oops, I clicked off of there. Definitely don't want to do that. So you have to say who it's coming from, which is a little weird. You could just say, Simple Growth's quote request form, something like that. And then you do need to put an email, and there's the cat.
The cat is back.
So you do need to put an email where it's actually coming from. And then you do need to put a subject line as well. So usually that'll just be like website quote form. And, something like you've received a new estimate request. Something like that, so that the email that you receive with this information actually makes sense. And then you're going to hit save. And that's the email notification. You can always click back in there and edit it a little bit. That's no problem. This right here, though, is specifically what the person who asked the question is going to want to look at. So this is where you're basically telling Service Autopilot, when someone submits this form, if they don't already exist in my system, create them in my system. So it might not seem like a huge deal, but manually entering each one of these leads does take 30 seconds. If you're doing 500, 1,000 quote requests a year, that is just like monotonous time that you can get back by doing this task once and for all.
Yeah, so this is definitely the way to tackle it. So I'm glad you brought this up, because this is a part that everybody misses, and it ends up sitting on your My Day screen. You got to do double entry.
Exactly. So kind of like the default things, what it's saying here is what is the matching criteria? At what point should Service Autopilot say, don't add this person again? They already exist in the field, in the system. So for example, if Mike Callahan fills out this form and Mike Callahan already exists in the system, based on how this is currently set up, it would say, I don't need to create another Mike Callahan. Where that becomes an issue, though, is if we got two people named Mike Callahan with two
Then you're in trouble.
emails, two totally different addresses. Well, now we might have just overridden, another Mike Callahan with this Mike Callahan. So you do want to have typically at least one more field in here, and that would be the email. So that if you have two people with the exact same name, Mike Smith, but they have different emails, it would say, oh, this is a new person, and we're going to create another person in your system as a lead. So you can get a little bit more granular with it if you wanted, by saying, well, what if Mike Callahan has multiple properties, like rental properties that we want to get serviced? Well, if he submits another quote request for a different property, we might want to have an address field in here that says all four of these things need to match in order for Service Autopilot to say this is the same contact. So
Makes sense. I appreciate you hopping on here, dealing with me, and breaking this down. Is there anything else we need to know before we hop on to the team call? But I think this is probably an eye opener for a lot of folks that have not seen a V3 form actually configured.
Yeah. Last thing is you probably want like a My Day notification. So when this quote request gets submitted, you're probably going to want to turn that on so that you can see those notifications right on your My Day screen, because you might not be checking your email 24/7. And then last but not least, you're going to want to publish this form. So there was a couple fields in the form that I didn't map, like such as what services you wanted a quote for. That information is just going to exist in the form itself. It's not really going to map anywhere on the client file typically. But so these warnings aren't, sometimes they are beneficial, but these you can kind of just disregard because I knew these weren't mapped anywhere. But you want to go to form options here. And when you hit publish, sometimes it takes a second. Says your form has been saved and published. Now we can actually take these codes, and it gives you a couple different options, and copy and paste that and put it on your website, wherever you're hosting your website. So the most common one that we recommend is this actual embedded form, just so that when we copy and paste this, we put it on the website, you don't need to repeat this process ever again. If you want to change your form, maybe you add another service. Well, you would just come into this form, add the option in here, and then come back here, hit publish again, and that would actually automatically update on your website. So
Awesome. That's one of the
the
biggest issues.
Yeah. So hopefully that was helpful. And if you do have any more questions about that form, just comment on the video, or I think Mike's going to include a link, sgscall.com, and we can chat more about it.
Absolutely. Yeah. If any questions around this or anything else in your business, check us out at sgscall.com for free business analysis or software analysis. Once again, we'll see you again in Callahan's Corner. You ask the questions, we answer them live right here on Facebook. Dylan and Mike on our way to the weekly leadership meeting.